The car engine roared to life, a jarring contrast against the stillness of the afternoon. A knot formed in my stomach as I watched it disappear down the driveway. Finally, alone, it should have been relief I felt, but a nauseating mix of guilt and dread churned instead. I slumped onto the kitchen stool with a groan. My fingers still tingled from typing those words, spilling my guts onto an anonymous online forum. Would a bunch of strangers even care about my messy life? More importantly, would any of it help? The familiar kitchen clock ticked, each second reminding me he'd be home soon. I swallowed hard, rehearsing the smile I'd perfected over years of practice. The one that fooled Daniel, the one that said everything was perfect in our little suburban world. A car door slammed outside and I flinched. Was it him, home early? Panic and a strange, twisted anticipation warred within me. For a moment, my legs wouldn't move. Then, steeled by desperation, I pushed off the stool and hurried to the door. Honey, I'm home. His voice, the usual warmth in it, yet something was off. A slight strain around the edges, a forced cheerfulness that sent chills down my spine. Was he hiding something? The thought sent icy fingers down my back. He wrapped me in a hug, and I clung to him, both out of habit and a sudden need for reassurance. But his eyes, they didn't linger on me. They darted around, scanning the room as if checking for something, or someone. My skin prickled. Was he looking for evidence of my secret life? Messages carelessly left open, a stray lipstick? Or, the thought twisted my stomach further, was there someone else he expected to find here? Long day, he sighed, loosening his tie. You wouldn't believe the traffic. I managed a sympathetic murmur, but doubt nibbled at the edges of my mind. Traffic jams weren't exactly a daily occurrence on our quiet street. He was lying, but about what? Dinner was torture. The usual chatter about our days died in my throat, guilt choking me with each bite. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, eyebrows knitting together for just a second before he slipped it back into his pocket. It could have been nothing. A work email, a friend. But after everything, every tiny shift in his expression felt like a neon sign flashing my betrayal. Had I been this paranoid before? Or was my newfound guilt finally making me see what had always been there? The bathroom felt like a lifeline, the locked door a flimsy shield against the storm brewing inside me. My hands shook as I scrambled to find Tom's message, the flirty gift flashing obnoxiously bright. Hey, beautiful, the text read, what are you up to tonight? A twisted thrill sparked in the pit of my stomach, battling against the ever-present nausea of guilt. Deleting the message felt like hacking away a piece of myself, the part that craved excitement, no matter how destructive. I splashed cold water on my face, forcing myself to breathe. When I emerged from the bathroom, Daniel was there, leaning against the hallway wall. Everything okay? He asked, a slight furrow in his brow. His concern should have eased me, but the paranoia had taken root. Did he know? Was there a trace of Tom's message on my betrayed by a guilty blush? My mind raced, weaving a tangled web of lies I didn't know how to untangle. We made it through the night, a pretense of normalcy. Though, as I lay beside him, the phantom weight of Tom's touch burned against my skin. The rhythmic rise and fall of Daniel's chest felt foreign, the breathing of a man I no longer knew. Bleary morning light painted the room in shades of gray, mirroring the bleakness inside me. My reflection stared back from the mirror, a haunted stranger. The naive girl who'd fallen in love in a library aisle had vanished, leaving behind a woman drowning in self-loathing. A desperate urge to numb myself had me reaching for my laptop. The confessional post sat there, festering like an open wound. Comments trickled in, a jarring mix of sympathy and venomous judgment. It was a bizarre sort of relief, knowing I wasn't alone, yet terrifyingly isolating at the same time. The shrill ring of the phone shattered the fragile morning stillness. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Unknown number. Was this it, Daniel? Having discovered the ugly truth? Tom. Playing a different kind of cruel game? Or worse, someone who'd connected the dots on my online confession, threatening to tear everything down. I didn't want to answer, didn't trust myself to speak, but I also couldn't bear the relentless ringing. With trembling fingers, I brought the phone to my ear. "Hey sis, just calling to make sure we're still on for dinner on Friday?" My sister's voice, usually so warm, felt like shards of glass against my frayed nerves. I forced a smile into my tone, weaving a web of weak excuses about work piling up, a vague promise to get back to her once things calmed down. As I hung up, the silence of the house descended, no longer comforting. Each creak, each whisper of wind against the window panes, made my skin crawl. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, clung to me like a suffocating shadow. Daniel was gone, yet it felt as if 100 accusing eyes were boring into me. I tried to distract myself, tackling the dreaded laundry basket with a vengeance. Digging through piles of clothes, my hand brushed against something unexpected. A sock, a deep navy blue, not a shade Daniel ever wore. My stomach lurched, and my breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't proof, not really, but the seed of suspicion, already rooted deeply, sprouted anew. This tiny intruder felt like confirmation that the cracks in my perfect life were widening beyond repair. I shoved the sock deep into my jewelry box, a dark secret nestled amongst my tarnished treasures. It was foolish, but I needed to hold on to it, a physical reminder of the possibility that I wasn't the only one playing a dangerous game. My phone buzzed, a notification from Tom. "Lunch today?" My treat, it read, followed by a winking emoji. My traitorous heart did a little flip. My first instinct was to say no, to shut him down, but even as the words formed in my head, a reckless thrill coursed through me. "Sure." I typed back, the decision both exhilarating and terrifying. We were pushing this past the point of thrill into something far more dangerous. A meeting in broad daylight, the risk far greater. Yet, the voice of caution was drowned out by the siren song of self-destruction. I picked a cafe in a neighboring town, somewhere unfamiliar. As I walked in, my knees felt wobbly, a mix of fear and an anticipation I didn't dare name. Tom was there already, flashing that cocky grin that had gotten me into this mess in the first place. His touch, as he brushed a strand of hair from my face, sent shivers down my spine, a mix of desire and deep revulsion. Lunch was a blurry haze of coded words and sidelong glances. We danced around the truth, both of us knowing what hung unspoken between us. With each veiled innuendo, with each brush of his hand that lingered too long, the coil of guilt tightened around my throat. The sight of that car, with its distinctive dent on the side, hit me like a bucket of ice water. My mother-in-law, here, unannounced, my heart hammered a frantic tattoo against my ribs. She'd never liked me, right from the start. Her faint smiles and veiled digs were a staple at family gatherings, a constant reminder that I'd never truly be good enough for her precious son. But a surprise visit? This felt different, an escalation in the silent war we'd been waging for years. Panic threatened to choke me as I hurried inside. There she was, enthroned on the living room sofa, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. I forced a smile, the same one I'd perfected for Daniel after countless nights of lying wide awake beside him. "Fancy seeing you here," I chirped, trying desperately to sound nonchalant. She offered tea, a gesture that had more bite than warmth. As I fumbled with the kettle, my hands shaking, we engaged in a polite dance. I deflected probing questions about my job, about my plans for the weekend. All the while, a single question burned in my mind: did she know? Had Daniel cracked, confided in her about my betrayal? "Daniel seems distracted lately," she commented, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the teacup. The words hit me like a slap. My breath caught in my throat. Was she testing me, fishing for a confession? Or was this innocent, an older woman noticing her son's stress? Impossible to tell, her face a carefully constructed mask. I managed a brittle laugh. "Work's been a nightmare," I lied, my voice thin and unconvincing. We made it through the visit, a grueling test of endurance. But the moment she left, I collapsed onto the sofa, the weight of my secrets an unbearable burden. My phone buzzed, a fresh dose of poison. I reread my confessional post, the comments swirling around me like vultures. One, in particular, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. You reap what you sow, honey. It wasn't sympathy, not concern. It was a threat, a promise of retribution hanging in the digital air. Another message, this one from Tom. Drinks tonight? My traitorous heart did a little flip. It was insanity, utter madness, but something within me had snapped. I typed back a single word, sending myself hurtling further into the abyss. Yes. The cloak of darkness felt strangely freeing. Each step out of the house and away from the facade of normal life sent a jolt of twisted excitement through me. With each rustling leaf beneath my feet, the dull ache of guilt was momentarily drowned out by a reckless pulse of anticipation. I moved in the shadows, slipping the defiant scarlet lipstick into my purse. It was armor, a declaration of the woman I was becoming, someone who no longer cared about the consequences. Someone willing to risk it all for the fleeting thrill of being desired. He was waiting, leaning against the wall outside a dimly lit bar I'd never stepped foot in. This wasn't our usual day territory, this was uncharted, dangerous, the perfect reflection of the precipice I was dangling over. Inside, the pulse of music was loud, the chatter half drowned, creating a hazy, disorienting world where illicit desires could thrive. He ordered drinks, the brush of his fingers against mine sending a shockwave through me. Any guilt I might have felt, dissolved in the haze of alcohol. The conversation was a mere buzz beneath the surface. His eyes were on me, promising a night I should have run from but desperately craved. This wasn't about love, never had been. It was about feeling wanted, reckless, alive sensations my life with Daniel had long since extinguished. A quick escape to the bathroom offered a disorienting moment of clarity. My reflection was harsh under the fluorescent light, smudged makeup, eyes filled with a desperation I barely recognized. His text glowed on my phone screen, can't wait. And, as sick as it made me, neither could I. The thrill had overridden the fear, the consequences be damned. I was hurtling down this path of self-destruction, and deep down, I suspected there was no turning back. The rational, scared part of me knew this was wrong on every level. But that voice was getting fainter, muffled by the seductive whisper of rebellion. I was no longer the woman who yearned for simple happiness. I was addicted to the burn, and Tom stood before me, promising to fan the flames. Stepping from the haze of the bar, the world felt shockingly clear. The cold night air prickled against my flushed skin, a brutal reminder of the world I'd left temporarily behind. But even the chill couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into my back. I whipped around, scanning the darkness. A figure, barely visible in the shadows, seemed to melt further into the atric of the light. Or the beginnings of the consequences I'd been desperately trying to outrun? Suddenly she was there, emerging not from the shadows but from the crowd spilling out of the bar. A woman, her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. I know what you are, she spat, her voice low and venomous. The words hung heavy in the air. Who was she? Had she seen me with Tom? Was she another notch on his bedpost, here to deliver some vindictive payback? Or something far worse, had someone figured out my confession, found their way to my real life? Before I could formulate a response, she lunged. Her hand, heavy with rings, caught me across the cheek with a force that sent me reeling back. The sting was instant, fire spreading through me. Then, as quickly as she'd appeared, she was gone, disappearing into the night like a vengeful phantom. Shaking, breathless, I stumbled onwards. My mind raced in panicked spirals. Was this it, the beginning of my unraveling? Were more confrontations waiting in the wings, ready to expose my sins? The thought of the woman's rage, so visceral and personal, sent fresh waves of terror through me. Home felt miles away, each step punctuated by a frantic glance over my shoulder. My haven had transformed into a cage, the comfortable, familiar rooms suddenly echoing with sinister whispers. When my trembling fingers fumbled for the doorknob, relief flooded through me, then twisted into nausea as I remembered Daniel was still out. Late meeting, or his own secret assignation? His text cut through my swirling thoughts, running late. Don't wait up. A wave of relief washed over me, mingled with a dark, shameful thrill. Better this way, better to have the house, my sanctuary, to myself when I inevitably fell apart. The shower scoured away the night scent, the lipstick, the grime. But the imprint of the woman's fury lingered, the burning phantom slap on my cheek. In bed, under the familiar covers, I stared at the ceiling, the weight of my choices bearing down on me. Now there were two secrets, two threats hanging over me, my own transgressions, and the danger lurking in the shadows, born of them. Sleep wouldn't come, it likely wouldn't for a very long time. The woman from the night before invaded my dreams. Her eyes, blazing with fury, burned into my sleep-addled brain. I woke with a jolt, a phantom sting throbbing on my cheek, a visceral reminder that the nightmare was far from over. Daniel was already up, dressing with his usual efficiency. He didn't look at me, didn't offer his customary distracted peck on the cheek as he headed out the door. I didn't feel the usual guilt, only a strange hollowness. Was this detachment self-protection, or a symptom of the growing chasm between us? My eyes fell on my laptop, the open window of the confessional post staring back like an accusation. Panic seized me, the comments had grown increasingly venomous, some laced with a specificity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It felt as if someone was watching, dissecting my words, burrowing into my secret life. Was it Tom, twisting the knife? Or an anonymous stranger who'd somehow connected my digital plea to the real, flawed woman behind it? Frantically, I deleted the post, scrubbing my browser history clean. A futile gesture, I knew. The words were out there, their poison had already seeped into the world. My phone buzzed, and I flinched. It was my sister again, her cheerful voice so at odds with my fraying nerves. "Lunch tomorrow?" she asked. A wave of nausea washed over me. I craved the familiar, the comfort of her light, but the thought of feigning normalcy, of forcing a smile while my world imploded, was unbearable. A brittle excuse tumbled from my lips, my voice barely above a whisper. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I tried to read, but the words swam before my eyes. The usual bustle of the house seemed muted, replaced by a suffocating silence that mirrored my own inner desolation. When Daniel returned, my heart hammered against my ribs as I spotted an envelope on the counter. It wasn't the sleek stationery a lawyer might use, but the fear was just as present. Had he found the stray sock? A note from Tom I'd carelessly missed? Had the woman from the alleyway sought twisted revenge by exposing my secret? The weight of possibility was suffocating. Every step toward that innocent-looking envelope felt like marching towards my own execution. He reached for me, the familiar gesture suddenly feeling like the touch of a stranger. "Sorry I'm late," he said, a touch of weariness in his eyes. I flinched, the involuntary recoil a betrayal of my frayed nerves. His smile faltered, "Something wrong?" His tone held a mix of concern and something else. Accusation? Frustration? I couldn't read him anymore, couldn't decipher the language of his smiles and frowns. Our connection, once so solid, had become a foreign tongue. Dinner was a silent battle. I pushed food around my plate, the scent of the meal I'd normally find comforting now nauseating. His gaze settled on my untouched plate, a crease forming between his brows. "You're not yourself," he said finally, the weight of the statement hanging in the air. "Is everything all right?" The moment stretched, confess, now, beg for forgiveness, for a sliver of hope we could repair this broken mess I'd created. The words clawed their way to my throat, but fear strangled them before they could break free. "Just tired," I murmured, a pathetic lie against the roaring truth in my head. He studied me, suspicion flickering in his eyes before he sighed. Defeated, he rose and took our plates to the sink. Turning his back, a barrier between us, he reached for the envelope on the counter. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm, Judgment Day, or just another mundane bill. "It's from Mom," he announced, the casual tones slicing through my tension. A strange mix of relief and disappointment warred within me. I'd wished for an end to this limbo, even a catastrophic one, and yet a cowardly part of me clung to the temporary reprieve. His voice continued, reading the contents of the letter aloud. An invitation to his parents' anniversary party, a celebration of a love I'd tarnished, of a family I'd never truly be a part of. The words were like nails hammered into my self-constructed coffin, each one sealing my fate as an outsider. Somewhere between the relief and the fresh wave of guilt, I knew that the path I was on led nowhere good. But the strength to turn around, to face the wreckage I'd caused? That strength still eluded me. A fresh wave of nausea hit me as I surveyed the contents of my closet. Every dress, every blouse, felt like a costume for a play I no longer wanted a part in. The role of devoted wife, once so effortless, now chafed against my skin as if made of sandpaper. I retreated to the edge of the bed, sinking down with a weary sigh. My gaze caught on the innocent-looking jewelry box tucked onto a shelf. An idea flickered, a desperate gamble against the despair threatening to engulf me. The stray sock lay nestled amongst my grandmother's pearls, that damned blue a stark contrast against the satin lining. I'd shoved it out of sight, out of mind, but it was a poison I could no longer avoid. Touching it, a ripple of memory ran through me. Daniel, coming home late one night weeks ago, smelling faintly of an unfamiliar perfume. A headache as an excuse, and I'd blindly stumbled to the laundry room, this sock shoved into my pocket in a haze of suspicion. Now, the puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Rage ignited inside me, a wildfire fueled by the hypocrisy of it all. He'd been cheating too? How long had this been going on? Who was she? The anger, fierce as it was strangely mixed with a bizarre relief. I wasn't the only monster here. I wasn't solely to blame for destroying this picture-perfect facade we'd built. We were both frauds, both players in a twisted game neither of us had the guts to end. The doorbell rang, a jolt back to the present. Hastily, I shoved the sock deeper into the box, a physical manifestation of the secrets I once again had to swallow. Showtime. I pasted on my practiced smile, the one I perfected in the mirror, and descended the stairs to the masquerade. The party washed over me in a blur of forced laughter, meaningless chatter. I watched Daniel through a new lens now. Each seemingly affectionate touch to his mother, each wrinkle around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, now felt like proof of an intimacy I'd been excluded from. It was a special kind of torture, witnessing the life I'd forfeited. Betrayal, it seemed, cut both ways. As the last guests filtered out, I felt as if a weight had been lifted, only to be replaced by a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. The collapse into the car brought a momentary sense of freedom, like escaping a claustrophobic room. Yet, as we pulled out of his parents' driveway, the world narrowed down to the confines of this car, to the man beside me who was both husband and stranger. He glanced at me, brows furrowed. "You sure you're okay?" The concern in his voice, once so comforting, now sounded hollow, a rehearsed line. Everything about him, his touch, his smile, his words, felt like a carefully constructed performance. The chasm between us yawned wider with each passing mile. I turned to him, a mix of desperation and resentment bubbling within me. I'd planned on confessing tonight, begging for a forgiveness I didn't deserve. But now, fueled by the discovery of his betrayal, a different path opened up, one laced with vengeance. "We need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. About what? There was a tightness to his voice, the first genuine crack in his facade. A flicker of fear danced in his eyes. Did he know about my affair? Or was this about the secret I now suspected he was hiding? My confession, poised on the tip of my tongue, died. In its place, the image of the navy sock flashed through my mind, undeniable proof of his own deception. About what this is, I said, the words heavy in the air between us. This marriage, this lie we're living, my voice trembled, but beneath it thrummed an icy resolve. We pulled into our driveway, the familiar house suddenly seeming foreign. The silence between us was palpable, a ticking time bomb. For years, we'd swept our problems under the rug, our smiles plastered in place. Tonight, those smiles had finally crumbled. The comfortable fiction of our lives was over. Whether we could survive the truth remained to surprise. Mark chirped, his voice dripping with a false cheer that set my teeth on edge. Tom and Jake are coming over for dinner. Well, isn't this just peachy? A spontaneous dinner with the guys? I glanced at the clock, 5:37 p.m., and sighed inwardly. Just enough time to throw together a meal that would pass for edible without requiring a culinary degree. Oh. Great, I replied, plastering on a smile that probably resembled a grimace. Should I put on a show too? The words tumbled out before I could stop them, a tiny rebellion against the disruption of my quiet evening plans. Mark either didn't notice my sarcasm or chose to ignore it. Just be yourself, babe. They're old friends. Right, old friends who seem to have developed a newfound interest in my cleavage. Last time these old friends were over, Tom couldn't keep his eyes off me. He'd stare with this hungry look, like he was trying to undress me with his mind. I shuddered at the memory, the hairs on my arms prickling. The evening unfolded with an unsettling blend of forced laughter and undercurrents of tension. Jake, bless his oblivious soul, was his usual jovial self, cracking jokes and regaling us with tales of his latest escapades. Tom, however, was a different story. His gaze seemed to follow me around the room, a silent predator stalking its prey. The meal concluded with an awkward silence as the three men shared a knowing glance, followed by a round of boisterous laughter. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the punchline to a joke I didn't understand. As they were leaving, Tom lingered behind. Thanks for dinner, he purred, leaning in close. His breath tickled my ear as he whispered, you look absolutely stunning tonight. I recoiled, a cold shiver racing down my spine. Thank you, I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't wait to get him out of my house. After they left, I crawled into bed, my mind racing with unanswered questions. Mark was already snoring softly beside me, oblivious to the turmoil brewing within me. Sleep evaded me as I replayed the evening's events, searching for clues, for answers. The next morning, I confronted Mark over breakfast. What was that last night? I asked, my voice tight with anger. Mark looked up from his newspaper, feigning surprise. What was what? Tom's behavior, I hissed. The way he was looking at me, the comment he made. Mark chuckled, a dismissive sound that fueled my anger. Oh, relax, Tom's just being Tom, he's always had a bit of a wandering eye. I stared at him, incredulous. You're just going to brush it off like that? What do you want me to do? He snapped, his patience wearing thin. He's my friend, he didn't mean anything by it. I pushed back from the table, my appetite gone. You know what? I don't believe you. I stormed out of the room, leaving Mark to stew in his own denial. A knot of unease tightened in my chest, a feeling that this was just the beginning of something much more sinister. I swear, if I see Tom's smug face at my door one more time, I might just, accidentally, trip him into the rose bushes. It had only been a few days since that disastrous dinner, yet Tom had already found count him, 3 reasons to drop by. First, it was a borrowed drill he conveniently forgot to return. Then, he needed Mark's expert opinion on some obscure carburetor issue that apparently required a demonstration right next to me on the couch. Today? Oh, today he's brought homemade cookies. For Mark, he says. Sure, Jan, and I'm Marie Antoinette. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being hunted. Every time Tom is near, it's like an invisible hand is tracing a path down my arm, a whisper against my neck. He finds excuses to brush against me, a friendly pat on the back that lingers just a bead too long. The man has all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. "How are you holding up, Sarah?" Tom asked, his voice dripping with faux concern. He was perched on our kitchen stool, nibbling on a cookie like a goddamn Disney princess. "Peachy," I replied, my tone as dry as the Sahara. "Just peachy." I turned back to chopping vegetables, willing him to disappear. But Tom, ever the persistent one, continued his assault on my nerves. "I know things have been tough lately," he said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I want you to know that I'm here for you. You can tell me anything." "Oh, I bet I could. I could tell you about the nausea that churns in my stomach every time you're near. I could tell you about the late-night texts filled with compliments that sound more like veiled threats. I could tell you about the growing dread that my husband, the man I vowed to trust till death do us part, is in on this sick game." But instead, I pasted on a smile and said, "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that." The texts continued, each one more explicit than the last. I deleted them as quickly as they arrived, but the words seemed to linger, staining my mind like ink on a white dress. It was as if Tom was trying to plant a seed of doubt, a seed that was slowly taking root in my heart. I couldn't take it anymore. I showed Mark the texts, my voice shaking with rage. "Explain this," I demanded. Mark's face paled, then hardened. "You're being ridiculous," he snapped. "Tom's just going through a rough patch. He doesn't mean anything by it." "Doesn't mean anything?" I scoffed. "He's practically propositioning me." "He's not," Mark insisted, his voice rising. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I felt a cold dread settle over me. Was Mark really that blind, or was he just pretending? The distance between us seemed to widen with every passing moment. That night, after Mark fell asleep, I crept out of bed and grabbed his phone. My heart pounded as I scrolled through his messages, his emails, his photos. I was looking for any sign, any hint of collusion with Tom. What I found sent a chill down my spine. It was a photo of me, asleep, taken from an angle that suggested it was taken without my knowledge. The seed of doubt had bloomed into a full-fledged weed, its roots winding their way through my heart, poisoning everything they touched. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the sickening truth I'd stumbled upon. The photo was just the tip of the iceberg, a single snowflake in a blizzard of betrayal. Driven by a morbid curiosity, I dug deeper into Mark's digital life, navigating through folders with titles like "Fishing Trip" and "Work Stuff." It was in the seemingly innocuous "Receipts" folder that I unearthed the real treasure, a series of encrypted messages between Mark and Tom. At first, the messages were cryptic, filled with code words and inside jokes that meant nothing to me. But as I pieced them together, a horrifying picture began to emerge. They were planning something involving me. The details were vague, but the implications were clear. They saw me as an object, a plaything to be shared and used for their own twisted pleasure. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and clammy. My stomach churned with nausea, a physical manifestation of the betrayal that was tearing me apart. It was as if the ground beneath me had cracked open, swallowing me whole into a dark abyss of despair. I stumbled into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. The image of that photo, the words from those messages, played on a loop in my mind, each repetition driving a deeper wedge into my shattered heart. Silent tears streamed down my face as I leaned against the cold tile wall. I felt numb, disconnected from my own body, as if I were watching this scene play out from a distance. The world around me seemed to warp and distort, a grotesque reflection of the brokenness inside me. The trust one had once placed in Mark, the foundation upon which I had built our life together, crumbled into dust. I felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of pain and betrayal, with no lighthouse to guide me back to shore. As the initial shock wore off, numbness gave way to a white-hot fury. A primal rage surged through me, fueled by the injustice of it all. I had been violated, objectified, reduced to a mere object in their sick fantasy. I wouldn't let them get away with it. I wouldn't be a victim. I would rise from the ashes of this betrayal, stronger and more determined than ever before. A cold, calculating resolve settled over me. A promise whispered into the silence of the bathroom. I would have my revenge. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, let me tell you, my revenge was being prepared in a walk-in freezer, with extra ice on the side. I emerged from the bathroom, a steely resolve hardening my features. No more tears, no more weakness. It was time to become a predator. First order of business. Evidence collection. I meticulously combed through Mark's phone, extracting the incriminating photos and messages like a surgeon performing a delicate procedure. Each piece of evidence was a weapon, a bullet to be loaded into the chamber of my revenge. I saved everything to an encrypted cloud storage, a fortress that even Mark's tech-savvy mind couldn't penetrate. Then came the hardest part. Pretending everything was normal. I plastered on a smile, cooked dinner, and even managed to choke down a few bites without gagging. I became a master of deception, a chameleon blending seamlessly into the background while my mind raced with strategies and schemes. I dropped subtle hints during conversations, planting seeds of doubt in Mark's mind about Tom's loyalty. I left ambiguous comments on Tom's social media posts, designed to pique his wife's curiosity. It was a delicate dance, a game of cat and mouse where I held all the cards. One night, as Mark slept soundly beside me, I sent an anonymous email to Tom's wife. It contained a few choice details about their affair, just enough to spark suspicion without revealing my hand. It was a risky move, but I knew it was necessary to set the wheels of chaos in motion. The atmosphere in our home grew thick with tension, a palpable unease that hung in the air like a toxic fog. Mark's eyes followed me with suspicion, his once tender touch now cold and hesitant. Tom's visits became less frequent, his demeanor guarded and weary. I watched it all unfold with a twisted sense of satisfaction. The storm was brewing, the clouds darkening with each passing day. Soon, the truth would come crashing down, shattering the fragile facade they had built around their deceit. And I would be there, front and center, to witness their downfall. The taste of revenge was bitter, but oh so sweet. It was a poison I willingly drank, knowing it would both heal and destroy me. But I didn't care. I was a woman scorned, a force to be reckoned with. And the storm was just beginning. D-Day arrived sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun streams through the windows, casting long shadows that dance on the walls. A day meant for barbecues and laughter, not marital Armageddon. But hey, who am I to deny fate its sense of irony? Mark and Tom were conveniently gathered on our back patio, beers in hand, oblivious to the storm brewing behind the sliding glass door. I took a deep breath, grabbed the manila folder containing my arsenal of evidence, and marched out like a warrior queen ready to slay some dragons. "Gentlemen," I announced, my voice dripping with venom. "We need to talk." Their heads snapped up, surprise etched on their faces. Mark's brow furrowed with concern, while Tom's eyes narrowed with a hint of suspicion. "What's up, babe?" Mark asked, his voice laced with a nervous tremor. I held up the folder, a smirk playing on my lips. "Oh, just a few things I found while cleaning out the attic." I tossed the folder onto the table, scattering its contents like confetti at a funeral. The photos, the messages, the emails, all laid bare for their viewing pleasure. "What the hell is this?" Mark sputtered, his face turning a shade of crimson that would make a tomato blush. Tom, ever the smooth talker, tried to play it cool. "Sarah, honey, I can explain." "Explain what, Tom?" I retorted, my voice rising. "That you and my husband have been having a secret affair behind my back?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's denial was swift and unconvincing, a desperate attempt to salvage the sinking ship of his lies. Tom, on the other hand, resorted to anger, his voice booming with indignation. "You're crazy," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. This is all a misunderstanding. Oh really? I countered, pulling out my trump card. Then how do you explain the fact that you two have been meeting at the Shady Pines Motel every Tuesday afternoon for the past 3 months? A gasp ripped through the air. I turned to see Tom's wife, Emily, standing in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. Emily, Tom stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Don't you, Emily, me, you lying bastard, she shrieked, her composure shattering like a dropped wine glass. What followed was a scene straight out of a soap opera. Accusations flew, insults were hurled, and tears flowed freely. Mark and Tom, once confident and cocky, now resembled cornered animals, their bravado replaced by fear and shame. I watched it all unfold with a detached sense of satisfaction. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a cold, empty space where my heart used to be. But I didn't care, I had one. The taste of victory was bittersweet, a toxic cocktail of triumph and despair. It was a victory born from betrayal, a triumph forged in the fires of heartbreak. As Mark and Tom's lives crumbled before my eyes, I felt a flicker of something akin to pity. But it was quickly extinguished by the memory of their betrayal, their violation of my trust. I had unleashed the storm, and it was glorious. Well, if there's one thing my divorce taught me, it's that lawyers make a killing off the misery of others. And boy, did they feast on mine. I handed Mark those divorce papers with a flourish that would make a Vegas magician proud. He stared at them like they were written in ancient Sumerian, his face a mask of disbelief. You can't be serious, he stammered, his voice barely audible. We can work this out. Oh, honey, we're way past working it out. You don't get to violate my trust, share me like a borrowed book, and then expect a cozy reconciliation. This isn't a Hallmark movie, it's real life, and in real life, cheaters get the boot. What followed was a legal battle worthy of a John Grisham novel. Mark, apparently fueled by a sudden desire to win at something, fought tooth and nail to make my life a living hell. He contested every point, argued over every penny, and generally behaved like a petulant child who'd lost his favorite toy. But I held firm, armed with the righteous fury of a scorned woman and a lawyer who billed by the nanosecond. The ripple effects of their affair didn't stop with my divorce. Tom's wife, Emily, a woman I'd once considered a friend, filed for divorce as well. She was a shell of her former self, her eyes haunted by a pain I knew all too well. It was a cruel irony that the very act of revenge that had brought me a twisted sense of satisfaction had also caused immense suffering to another woman. As the news of their infidelity spread through our social circle, Mark and Tom became pariahs. They were shunned at parties, whispered about at the grocery store, their reputations tarnished beyond repair. Mark lost his job, a casualty of the scandal that had engulfed his personal life. His financial stability crumbled like a house of cards, leaving him penniless and desperate. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the photo, the messages, the betrayal. The guilt evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had made their bed, and now they were lying in it, tangled in the sheets of their own deceit. As the dust settled, I found myself adrift, a lone survivor in a sea of wreckage. The pain was still there, a dull ache that throbbed beneath the surface. But it was no longer all-consuming. With the help of a therapist and the unwavering support of my friends and family, I began the slow and arduous process of healing. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to crawl back into bed and never emerge. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, haunted by the ghosts of what could have been. But I persevered, one day at a time, one step at a time. With each passing day, the pain lessened, the anger subsided. In their place, a newfound strength and resilience emerged. I had been through the fire, and I had come out on the other side, scarred but not broken. The betrayal had stripped away the illusions I had clung to, revealing a strength I never knew I possessed. Revenge is a dish best served. Online, I chuckled to myself, the irony not lost on me as I clicked the publish button on my newly minted blog. I'd always been more of a Pinterest and cat memes kind of gal, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and boy, was I desperate to serve up a steaming plate of digital payback. The Chronicles of a Cheater and His Creep wasn't exactly the New York Times bestseller list material, but it was raw, unfiltered, and brutally honest. I detailed every cringeworthy moment of the affair, from Tom's slimy advances to Mark's pathetic denials. I even threw in a few choice screenshots of their private messages, just to spice things up. To my surprise, the blog took off like a rocket. It seemed everyone and their grandma had an opinion on my messy marital saga. The comments section became a battleground of righteous indignation and armchair psychology. Some called me a hero, others a vindictive harpy, but one thing was clear. Mark and Tom were being dragged through the digital mud, their reputations shredded like cheap toilet paper. Their names became synonymous with betrayal and deceit. They were ridiculed on social media, mocked in memes, and even featured in a satirical news segment about the dumbest cheaters of the year. I'll admit, it was a guilty pleasure to watch their downfall. I reveled in the sweet taste of revenge, a potent elixir that numbed the pain and fueled my resolve. They had underestimated me, treated me like a pawn in their twisted game. But I had shown them that I was not to be trifled with. I was a force to be reckoned with, a woman scorned who could wield the power of the internet like a weapon of mass destruction. As the initial frenzy died down, I found myself at a crossroads. I could continue to wallow in the muck of their misery, or I could choose to rise above it. I deleted the blog, erasing the last vestiges of their presence from my life. It was time to move on, to create a new narrative for myself. I sold the house, packed my bags, and set off on a cross-country road trip. I hiked through national parks, sampled local cuisine, and met fascinating people from all walks of life. With each passing mile, the weight on my shoulders grew lighter, the ghosts of the past fading into distant memories. When I returned home, I was a changed woman. I had shed the skin of the betrayed wife and emerged as a stronger, more confident version of myself. pen_spark. I had learned that forgiveness was not about absolving the perpetrators but about freeing myself from their toxic grip. I still bear the scars of that betrayal, a reminder of the pain I endured. But those scars are also a testament to my resilience, a badge of honor that I wear with pride. I am no longer defined by the actions of others. I am the author of my own story, the master of my own destiny. And that, my friends, is the sweetest